A man entering the wilderness unprepared is a fool tempting fate, and I have never aspired to be a fool. The Felsenthal bottoms do not welcome improvisation. They reward forethought, planning, and a healthy respect for what lies beyond the county-maintained road. My preparations for the venture were therefore meticulous, the way a man arranges his life before venturing into unknown country. It is one thing to sell paper from Crossett to Bastrop. It is another thing entirely to track the ghost of a woodpecker through the last remnants of its chosen forest. I began assembling my gear a week before the trip. There is a ritual pleasure in such arrangements, a satisfaction born of order. My dining table looked like an inventory of practical modesty. A pair of Bushnell 10x42 binoculars, a silver Ranger compass with its base plate polished clear, a laminated topographical map that had once belonged to a forestry intern, a Stanley thermos filled with coffee brewed black and bitter enough to qualify as medicinal, and a revolver, a Smith & Wesson Model 10, that rested in its holster like an old friend. The revolver, contrary to the expectations of those who equate firearms with bravado, was not for hunting. I have always believed that a well-maintained gun, like a well-maintained conscience, exists best when untested. Its presence was more philosophical than practical, a talisman against the unknown, a reassurance that one's hands, however trembling, are not entirely empty when faced with mystery. Black bears, coyotes, even men of ill intent, such possibilities do not frighten me so much as the feeling of being unprepared. 2 pimento cheese sandwiches wrapped in wax paper completed the essentials. My wife would have preferred I carry something more substantial, but sandwiches made at dawn carry a kind of virtue. The simplicity of them, white bread, sharp cheese, and mayonnaise, reminds a man that life, like lunch, can be sufficient without flourish. My conveyance to the drop-off point was a 2018 Toyota Tacoma TRD off-road, a truck I have come to regard as the finest expression of modern utility. It is not ostentatious. It is not the sort of machine that demands admiration from strangers at gas stations. It simply does its job. I've driven it through knee-deep mud, along gravel-cut banks, and atop timber roads forgotten since the Depression. The truck is built with purpose, a sharp contrast to certain domestic models that seem designed by committees of people who have never had to change a tire in the rain. The Tacoma's hum is steady and self-assured, the kind of hum a man can think to. On this particular morning, its bed carried a small single-axle trailer, upon which was strapped my pride and joy, a Honda Pioneer 1000 side by side. I debated this purchase for months, the way some men debate religion. I justified it as a field necessity, an instrument of exploration, a bridge between civilization and wilderness. But the truth is simpler. It was something I wanted. After 42 years of justifying everything to balance sheets, I felt entitled to at least one impractical practicality. The Pioneer, with its narrow wheelbase and high suspension, is well suited to the forgotten tracks that crisscross southern Arkansas. The old tram lines, built by the El Dorado and Bastrop crews a century ago, were not meant for trucks or SUVs. They were the veins of the timber trade, iron rails laid through the heart of the forest to bleed it of its virgin pine. Once the trees were gone, the tracks were pulled, leaving only the faint impression of human intent, a straightness that nature has not yet forgiven. Driving south along Highway 425, I fell into the rhythm of the road, the small thud of the hitch, the steady hiss of tires on asphalt, and the rising brightness of a morning that promised neither mercy nor malice. The radio was off. Conversation was unnecessary. I thought of the men who had built that tram bed 100 years ago. Immigrants and farm boys armed with crosscut saws, working under the command of foremen who measured their worth in board feet. They were not bird watchers. They were industrialists in overalls, conscripts at commerce, feeding the great appetite of the Crossett Lumber Company.
In their time, the forest was a crop to be cut and shipped, its future left to chance and regrowth. Yet here I was, decades later, driving into the same forest to find a bird that needed the very trees those men had felled. History, it seems, is a circle drawn with a cross-set. I wondered what they would make of a man like me, an aging salesman with a camera, a map, and a guilty fondness for the product of their labor. At a pull-off near the refuge boundary, I parked the Tacoma, stepped out, and listened. The sound of the engine faded into the immense quiet of the bottoms, a quiet so complete it felt like a living thing. The air was dense, full of the smell of pine pitch and damp earth. Somewhere far off, a woodpecker struck 3 deliberate notes, as if to test the air for resonance. I felt in that moment both the smallest and the luckiest man alive. I unloaded the Pioneer carefully, tightening each strap before unhooking it from the trailer. I have learned ritual attention, checking, rechecking, is the difference between adventure and ordeal. The machine touched the ground with a soft, satisfied sigh. Its engine barked once and settled into a deep, confident hum, like a dog that knows its way home even in strange woods. The plan was simple. I would take the tram line south, cross a small creek shown on the topo map, and stop at the second ridge to begin glassing the canopy. The red-cockaded woodpecker prefers mature stands where open pine crowns and sunlight meet. I hope to find that rare combination, photograph the bird if fortune allowed, and be home before dark. But the woods, I have learned, have a habit of revising plans made in comfort. As I stood beside the idling Pioneer, I felt a twinge of anticipation, part curiosity, part something older and unnamed. Men who spend their lives in towns forget that silence has texture. Out there you can feel it, woven with distance, folded with time. I climbed into the driver's seat, adjusted my hat, and looked once more at the map folded on my knee. The line was faint but true, and the morning was still young. So began my venture into the Felsenthal bottoms. It was, at that moment, a perfectly reasonable plan, executed by a perfectly ordinary man in possession of all necessary tools. I did not yet know that reason, once loosed in the wilderness, often finds companies stranger than sense.